about those expenditures later when we move on to that part of the presentation. The debt service levy provides the property taxes that are used to pay the principal and interest on any outstanding bonds. Property taxes are billed to taxpayers based on the assessed valuation of their property. And assessed valuation or assessed value is a legal term. It's a percentage of the true market value of the property. And so the fair market value or assessed value times these assessed valuation percentages gives you the assessed value. And those rates are set by the statute, and they're the same across the whole state of Missouri for all taxing jurisdictions. Personal property is things like vehicles, manufacturing equipment, and the first three are all real property. This is one of those areas where the appendix has some charts on the assessed valuation by each of these types of property, as well as the revenue by each. And 44% of our property tax revenue comes from residential property, so that's far and away the largest piece. Property taxes or properties are reassessed in every odd-numbered year by the Buchanan County Assessor, and that's done on a cycle basis here, and those years are shown up here. I guess the important point to remember is that the county assessor does reassessment, not the school district. There are three key components that go into the calculation of your property tax bill: the fair market value of the property, the tax rate, and the assessment rate. The tax rate that I've used, $4.04, is the total. That's the operating and debt service, because when you're paying it, you don't really care which it is. That's just the total rate, and that also includes the 63 cents. And I used a $100,000 home just because that's an easy number to use. If you want to figure out the taxes for a $50,000 home, it's half of that. If you want to look at $200,000, it's twice that. So that tax would be $767.60 that would go to the St. Joseph School District. Now, your tax bill also has other taxing jurisdictions in Buchanan County, and typically the school district will be about 60 to 62% of that total. Another important point to remember is that because of the Hancock Amendment, if we have an increase in the assessed valuation for the school district, that doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to get more revenue. Just the very simplified version of what that law says is that if the assessed value on properties goes up, then the tax rate has to go down to compensate for that. The next pieces of revenue to talk about are the Prop C sales tax, which is about 8.4%. And this is one of those that we are seeing declines. The number for 09-10 will probably be around $330,000, yes, less than the year before. And we expect that to be pretty flat in 10-11. So you think about purchases and sales tax, that would be what you would expect with the economy. Categoricals are what the state calls all of the other state aid besides the formula, and those amount to about 5.2% of our total revenue. One of the biggest of those is transportation, and that is paid as a reimbursement of our expenses. So we are getting around 44% right now. The law is that it's 75%, but because the funding has not been available, it's reduced down to about 44%. If the governor doesn't make any further cuts in the budget for next year, that will be about 41%. And will be signing legislation sometime this month and has said that he's going to cut another $350 million out of the state budget. So I'm very concerned that transportation may be one of those pieces that gets cut some more. Once they start cutting an area, it seems a whole lot easier to just keep doing that. Another one that has been in the news a lot is Parents as Teachers, or PAT, and the state reduced that by 23% in 09-10, and it's been cut in the budget another 55% for 10-11. And I know that those people are very concerned that the governor might just do away with the entire program, which would be a shame. It's a good program. The next piece of revenue is our federal revenue, which is about 11%. I've got all of the main categories of that on the slide. What you need to remember here is that we only get the money when we spend it. We turn in those expenditures and then are reimbursed. So that money can't be diverted to pay for other programs. we couldn't use, say, the special education money and pay for district-wide technology purchases or universal preschool. It's got to be spent on special education. So kind of the takeaways to remember about our revenue is that really our local property taxes are not growing. Our assessed valuation is pretty flat. Enrollment is the key driver of state aid, and it's fairly flat. Mr. Bramer talked about slight increases, 0.6% a year, but not anything very huge. And the state aid per student has been shrinking due to Missouri's budget problems. And federal revenue is restricted. We can't take that and spend it on anything else. So let's move on to expenditures. How do we spend our money? Well, we spend 61% on salaries and 16% on benefits. So you can see that's a huge chunk of that pie that we spend on our staff, which is really our most valuable asset. Those are the people who influence our students and are in front of them every day. So that's a good place to spend our money. It's about 1% each for technology, textbooks, and capital improvements, and then 20% that's other. And that probably raises the question that 20% is a pretty big chunk, so what do we spend that on? Well, and 2.4% of the total is other capital expenditures, and that's things like buses, equipment for vocational education programs, furniture, equipment for food service, for security, for maintenance, any vehicles, any land purchases. Other occupancy, that's things like utilities and insurance. Food service, that's primarily buying the food that's prepared for school lunches. Transportation, that's primarily payments to First Student, who's our bus company, the fuel for the buses, as well as paying the drivers for the special ed buses that we own. Student activities, a large portion of that is funded by funds raised by the students or fees that they pay. And then again, the all other, which is 6.4% of the total, and that is really a whole laundry list of things. I'll just read some of those. Library books, postage, phones, professional development, copying, tuition for alternate certification for staff, audit fees, legal fees, elections, office supplies, classroom supplies, summer school and summer explorers expenses, supplies for counseling, nurses and assessment departments, technology consumables, and software licenses. And obviously that's not everything, but you get the idea. There are a lot of things and no individual item in there is particularly large. So that's how we spend our operating money, 77% of that on staff. But let's switch gears and go on to the debt service fund. And we really are switching gears here. Debt service is what's used to pay for our bonds. Currently, the district has about $23.1 million of outstanding bonds, and that's the remaining amount of the $36 million of bonds that were issued in 2019. And those have interest rates of about 5.25% to 6.5%. Bonds are used by school districts to pay for major construction and renovation costs. For example, if we built a new school building. The payments from the debt service fund can only be used for bond principal and interest costs. And our outstanding debt has a legal limit, which is 15% of our assessed valuation, and then you subtract how many bonds are already outstanding. So based on that, the school district could issue another $125 million worth of bonds. So as you can see, the legal limitation is really not an effective constraint for us. Many school districts are right up against that limit and they have a problem. They can't issue more bonds. Bonds have to be approved by a majority of the voters, and that depends on when the election is held. Sometimes it's a supermajority and sometimes it is 2/3. A key component of our interest rate is our bond rating, and we recently had an increase from A- to A+. The better the bond rating, the lower the interest cost. And anytime we have an election for bonds, the voters are voting to give the district the authority to issue a specific amount of debt. The language on the ballot will